I asked you out of 30 questions to answer 5, and some of you did rather well. Actually, all of you did well. But I would like to go over some things that are maybe a little bit fuzzy. For example, introduce the ethnic communities of Taiwan in brief, and this person made 4 categories. One are called Gaoshanzu, and the second are the unrecognized indigenous people, and the third are the Han Chinese, and also those who came from Fujian and other places in China, and the immigration during the late 1940s. And the 4th category is foreigners. Now, in the first category, Gaoshanzu, he is listing Ami, Sataya, Bunun, Saisha, Taroko, Zhao, Zhou, and others. And he also has Yami, and of course these are the guys on Orchid Island. And so the argument is that if you use these high mountain peoples category, and yet most of the people are living actually in valleys or on coastal areas, then it doesn't match their label or designation. Now the foreigners category here, and of course in the 3rd category where there's Han Chinese, I suppose that would include Hakka and Minnan people and Laotian, the mainland people. And the foreigners, this is probably the most interesting category because almost every country has its immigration. So there's always going to be in every country an influx of foreign people. And when there was a country when I was a teenager called Yugoslavia, and I got there, and I was, I thought it would be cool to hang out there for a while. and on the highway, there are all these cars, all with lots of luggage and baggage and things like that. And it was like a great caravan. And I asked people, where are these people coming from and where are they going? Oh, I was told, they use our country from Turkey to Germany. And they were all coming out, and they got some kind of passport visa to go to Germany for labor, I suppose, to work there. And they were all going through the highway of Yugoslavia to get up north and to end up in Germany. So now the population there is quite large in Germany. It has grown significantly over several generations. So the foreigners are always arriving. So now who are the foreigners in Taiwan? Well, just look around. Yes? Did you raise your hand? So when people ask me if I am a foreigner, and I will say, just as he mentioned, I'll quote him, me a foreigner? I'll say, and Li Danghui 说那个我们一起都有新台湾人 So we're all new Taiwanese. And they would all look at me, oh, yes. No argument. And so there was a situation a few years ago for a stimulus package, as it was called in the U.S., to be given to everyone in Taiwan because of the economic downturn. And then something very unusual happened. There are a number, especially in the south of Taiwan, men, they go to Vietnam and Southeast Asia generally, and they will pick up a wife. And she's not a citizen, but she's at home and raising the children, and they're sort of tacitly citizens, I suppose. And even the children will be getting the stimulus in the family, but not the wife. So all these foreign housewives from Southeast Asia, they campaigned and protested to say, why are we left out? And then the government quickly, as it happens in Taiwan, decided that everyone living in Taiwan should get the stimulus, including yours truly. And thanks to the foreign housewives, I got mine.
What did it contain?
Everyone buy stuff.
Yes, it was, yes, just as in the U.S., it was a few $1,000s to stimulate you to partake in the economy.
Okay.
Yeah. So it really matters when you call the people foreigners. Now most, as I mentioned before, the foreigners are called Meiguoren. And this is because of the stereotype of being an American. And then foreigners are classified according to what they like and their tastes. Like they'll say, oh, the foreigners, they like to eat bread, and red wine, and cheese, and they have these different tastes. So actually they're talking about Euro-American sort of tastes. They're not talking about people in New Guinea or Central Africa or in other places of the world where there are foreigners. So the foreign classification then becomes narrow, but actually in Taiwan, increasingly this term foreigner is applying, let's say, to the friend of mine who cuts my hair. She is from Laos. And my fruit vendor, she's from Cambodia. And in Hualien, you can go to the community center and see films in Vietnamese and take cooking lessons in Indonesian. So, and of course this is to make people feel more at home living in Hualien, and it's becoming a little Southeast Asia. And so now these people, anyone who is not born in Taiwan, is whoever you might be from any country, from any part of the world, or no matter what you look like, is becoming a foreigner. So this whole idea of being a foreigner is spreading out. And it's really interesting because when I walk on the street, as in Sri Lanka, when you look at the people, you think everyone is Sinhalese. But actually some people are Tamil, or Burgher, or Moors, or Muslim, or Malay, or all these different ethnic groups in Sri Lanka. And as you live there longer, then you start to see that these are all really different people. And the longer I stay in Taiwan, when I walk on the street, I notice that, oh, she must be from Cebu in the Philippines, or that one is probably from Java. I wonder if she's from West Java, this kind of thing. And I can start to tell even what part of Java people are from, living in Taipei. And of course I can then also find out and observe people living in Taipei where they're coming from. They might be coming from Chiayi or Tainan, and they dress a little bit differently, from Kaohsiung. And I can see my students coming to this university. They're all from every place in Taiwan. And I talk to them or interact with them, and very soon I figure out where they're from, what part, what county, about how they sit or they write or their manner of speaking. And so actually all of Taiwan is in a sense in a migration. People are changing, generations are changing, and in location there are changes. So this whole idea of who are the foreigners now is a very different question than, I mean, I would say that 300 years ago, when the Hakka were arriving, they were considered the foreigners. They were the Waishenren. And then they got more assimilated, even though they were different people. They sort of felt more Taiwanese than the Waishenren who came in 1949. And then you have this influx of Americans and the bases, and now you have the influx of people from every place in the world entering into the society. So this whole idea of who are the Taiwanese is becoming not an ethnic issue, it's becoming a nationality issue, or a cultural issue, or maybe it's not even an issue. Everyone is Taiwanese.
I definitely see something about it.
Yes.
Has that ever come up politically? Like, what happens to the foreigners in this country if this went back to China? And, like, the people who have businesses here and stuff like that? Is there ever a big outcry against that aspect? Because I think that couldn't imagine it benefiting them either. Is that issue ever?
Well, of course, now you have opened a Christmas package. Going back to China is like Taiwan it can navigate. You know, it's a sense that I don't think anyone is interested in that. But there could be the only interest is that China might grab Taiwan.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
Then, if that happens, then what's going to happen to the foreign population?
Right.
Is your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, because I have redefined what is foreign,
Right.
I have to get back now to the Taiwan Relations Act of '79, and that's sort of like what is considered to be a safety net. Okay. But from my general survey in Taiwan, I estimate that there are enough American citizens living in Taiwan, from the Taiwanese who went to America in the 60s, who were blacklisted. Tens of thousands went to the U.S. They went to college there. They came back. They had children. The children became U.S. citizens. They moved back to Taiwan. Their children became U.S. citizens, and their children U.S. citizens. So what are the numbers of people who are related to a U.S. citizen living in Taiwan? Yes. There's probably a U.S. citizen in every family, Taiwanese family, at least one, who could claim that if there is an emergency, I'm taking my family.
Maybe Canadian too. There's a lot of Canadians.
And then what? So if there are 5 million U.S. citizens in Taiwan, and each one has a spouse or a mother and father or children or relatives that need to go in the evacuation, who's going to be left here? Or wouldn't the United States prefer that there's going to be a peaceful situation and never allow altercation to happen? And I got this idea when I was a young guy looking at the evacuation of Saigon. And all the people in Saigon were crowding into the U.S. Embassy to the point where only the U.S. Embassy was a safe haven, and then they only could take people out from helicopter from the roof of the embassy to aircraft carriers. And it was a helicopter shuttle, and they were just flying thousands and thousands of people who were climbing up onto the U.S. Embassy and jumping into the helicopter and going to the aircraft carrier. And the U.S. was completely committed to provide all of that service, all of the airlifting out for all of the possible people it could handle. And there were so many helicopters stacked up on the aircraft carriers, when they finally finished their job, they had to toss them over to make room on the deck for the people. So I can see that there will be a lot of concern to take families and relatives and U.S. citizens out of harm's way. Now, Hong Kong is different because in 1950, a lot of people, they could flee out of China to Hong Kong for safe haven. And they didn't have up to the handover in, when was it, 97, to accommodate, to certify all the people living in Hong Kong if they were genuine Hong Kong people, and the people who didn't have the so-called right to be in Hong Kong. I mean, they became British, they had British passports, but they couldn't identify themselves as legally Hong Kong citizens living there before 1949. These are the people who went to Vancouver. And when they went to Vancouver, they did not shut down their business or whatever. They went to get Canadian citizenship. And then they could come back to Hong Kong and work as Canadians. So this is and I was with one of my friends in Hong Kong, and he got a hotel. He bought a hotel in some place, the Mauritius, in the Indian Ocean. And he showed me his passport and his citizenship papers and everything. He said that, if I have to leave Hong Kong, I have another country to go to. And he said, by the way, do you know where it is?
Yeah.
I said, sure, in the Indian Ocean. He said, oh, are there flights there? Because he just invested, he bought the hotel and got his citizenship, but he had never been there.
Was able to get citizenship without going there?
Well, if you invest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, the businessman scheme, kind of 80,000 Canadian dollars.
Yeah. But he wasn't really concerned about ever going there. He just treated this his citizenship as a bonus for his investment, but if he needed to leave, but it never happened. You see, there wasn't really any interest to upset the people in Hong Kong. It was a fear, and so people who are attending to this kind of question also have a kind of fear, and especially the people, again, in 1949 who fled China have a fear, a sense that they're unsafe here, and therefore they go to the U.S. or immigrate to elsewhere. So when Zhang Jingguo passed away suddenly, and he was the son of Chiang Kai-shek, I mean, people were, and also I was not here. I mean, I was in 75, but not for that reason. But I was living here at the time of the passing of Zhang Jingguo. and there were people in great bereavement. They were crying and whining and rolling on the street, and they couldn't believe it that their man to bring them back to China died and and left them here. You know. Yeah, and it was. But I felt nothing about it. I mean, I thought, you know, people asked me, "What are you going to do now?" And I said, I don't know, nothing at all. But I said, it's too bad for him. You know, I'm sorry that he died, but you know, that's about it. You know, I didn't have any sense of danger or anything might change. You know.
At that point, were people still really, really set on going back to China? Did they really think?
Of course. Now, this says by the mid-1930s, this is the question on Japan. As Japan's empire was reaching its zenith, the colonial government began to political socialization program designed to enforce Japanese customs, rituals, and the loyal Japanese identity upon the Aborigines. Not only the Aborigines, but among all people. And certainly for Taiwan, the mid-1930s was the height of not the Japanese empire, but the Japanese presence of benefit in Taiwan. Because we know, actually it was probably from the 20s through the 30s. And then towards the end of the 30s, when China, from 37, invaded China, and then started all of Southeast Asia and the Pacific from 41, 42, and then the zenith of the Japanese empire went wild. I mean, Japan just expanded within 3 years everywhere. And then within 2 years, the whole thing collapsed. So it was a suicide zenith, in a sense, to expand so rapidly and then collapse as rapid. And losing the prize of its empire for that rapid expansion. Okay. So again, introducing the ethnic communities of Taiwan. This answer includes only the indigenous people. And then again, it goes from the island Pingpu to the high mountain Formosan. And something different about each of the groups, but not really answering the question on introducing the ethnic communities of Taiwan, which I think we have to dwell upon in terms of all of the communities. This is a question on cultural anthropology, is to study a specific group. And actually that should be termed as ethnology. Cultural anthropology is more of a comparative science. It will compare cultures, making anthropology a more holistic understanding of humanity. Comparative, the contrast and compare, is a very important aspect. And what I mean by contrast is there are differences, but then to compare similarities. Okay, this was looking at Taiwan as an archaeological laboratory in terms of geoecology, cultures, and scientific methods. It's mentioned here that Tadano Kano in 1943 identified the prehistoric cultures of Taiwan in 7 strata, suggesting origins. And to me, this person who is looking at in 1943 as a Japanese archaeologist, the war is going on and he's doing his digging. And the seminal work published in Tokyo in full color on the Yami was published in 1945. So I asked people how the ethnographers got to the press, how they went to the printing company, and where did they get the paper. And I was told because Tokyo, even though it was being bombed every day, wanted to show that it was functioning as a normal city. And you could get your ethnographic monograph with full color plates printed in 1945. This is a tenacity and determination of the Japanese to prove that.
Oh, yeah, a little bit. I'm okay. Just did not see that wire.
Laura, are you trying to sabotage the fascination? Are you competing on your questionnaires? Okay, what was the purpose of head hunting? Head hunting is a symbol of power, bravery, which is a common practice among Aboriginal tribes in Taiwan, except, of course, the Yami Dawu. To take the head of an enemy brought much prestige. In many of these Aboriginal communities, heads of the decapitated foes hung on poles or rested on open outdoor shelves, giving evidence of an individual's or village's success in armed conflict. Often the heads themselves were ceremonial, invited to join the tribe as members, where they were supposed to watch over the tribe and keep them safe. The practice was ended in the end of the first half of the 20th century during the Japanese occupation of Taiwan. What is missing? Headhunting was not a practice of decapitating foes or in armed conflict, and there was very little armed conflict. Usually you would, as a skilled hunter, swoop down on your prey and take off the head. And that was to keep land and resources protected around your village. And then invite this person, or not only the person, but all things that were ever hunted, the head or the bones were kept in your house in terms of having an amulet or a spirit protection and association with the spirit of the hunted. Okay, almost everyone did well on their comparison between shaman and priest. That's well done. So the Zhao Zu, they're supposed to be about 700. This says that there are 281. So I don't know how. Actually, what is the? But then this is in the year 2000, and so now they have grown to 700. I think their numbers of the indigenous people growing, I think, is a very interesting phenomenon. And also indigenous people interacting with also foreign or other people coming out of Southeast Asia to live in Taiwan, especially from the Philippines, Indonesia, and sharing some commonality of culture. That's going on as well. It says here, although Taiwan is a small island, then I'm asking, what about Orchid Island? How do you classify it then? What is small is a relative. So relative. But no, I don't see anyone's name on this paper. Must be at the end. Yeah. Okay. This paper is going to discuss the geospatial process. Although there were people from the Paleolithic age living on the island before the ice created the Taiwan Strait, the Ice Age had Taiwan as part of the continental shelf or landmass of Asia. And only after the Ice Age and the melting of the ice from 15,000 years ago to 7,000 years ago, it created the Taiwan Strait with the rise of sea level. It's very important to know that people lived in Taiwan 30 to 40,000 years ago, Paleolithic people, because we think of indigenous or Aborigines as the First Nation, but again they were an immigration process from 6,500 years ago, and they did not all just come at once. It's like the peopling of any place. They came in boats at that time. They came in different parts of Taiwan, and they inhabited eventually all of Taiwan and then migrated all over the island. And probably what happened as they came in different times and as different groups and from different places, and then they formed communities as cultures with different languages. And their only connecting relationship is that all of these languages happen to be Formosan. And therefore, this whole idea that the Formosan language went through an incubation of 1,000, 3,000 years to form the contemporary languages, of which perhaps one of these language groups then broke off into the Pacific, and leaving behind all these other groups intact in Taiwan for their own development. and migrating around the island as such. And then there's a famous, there are 600 temples in Taiwan. The most famous is many, of course, in the south, but at Daja they have a springtime festival and walk for, and I did, I was the Taida leader for the students, wear the armband and go in procession, all the Taida students with me, for 8 days walking and no sleep. Yeah, you start at midnight and you walk until the next morning, and you get pretty tired by then, and they allow you 20 minutes to rest in a temple while they blow their horns and beat the drums. And then you go down to the next temple and the next temple, and it's Mansu taking her vacation, visiting her sisters from Mansu temple to Mansu temple, until we arrived in the south at Shingan, and before that to Beigan. And then we doubled back through Jianghua, and then there was a ritual where gangsters, they try to steal her away. Of course they fail and get her flag or something that belongs to her, and then everyone chases after the gangsters. I mean, it's a ritual of theft and recovery. Then finally, with all these trials and tribulations of the route and getting back home, then there's a big, everyone's vegetarian for the 8 days, and there's a big pork feast out for another 4 days, and to celebrate her birthday.
Where is this again?
Daja is right here, near Taichung, right on the coast here.
Oh, yeah.
The Daja Sea. Yeah, and it's a famous port, like Lugan in its time, and a famous temple, and a beautiful old city. So, and to walk the 8 days, that was, and with all these thousands, and they get more and more, tens of thousands of pilgrims with you on the trail. And we're crossing paddy fields and going from temple to temple, and no sleep until we get to our destination. And then it's so exciting to be there, you don't want to sleep. Because this whole 10,000 people all together, all in the temple, and all celebrating Mansu at once. It's huge and beautiful. So we're going to look at some aspects of that and drama, I think, in this presentation. The oldest Mansu temple is here in Penghu, and as they are around, and at Luerman in Tainan, Anping, Lugan, Daja, Beigan, all these temples here, they associate their age. And the temples are not that old, yet they have a foundation stone, a charter, an image, or something that can date back 400 years. So it's their antiquity that makes them valuable and antique. And if the images actually came from Meizhou, from the origin, or the source temple of Mansu in Fujian, also they're extremely valuable. So the people from Beigan, they did a pilgrimage out to the oldest temple, to Penghu, and the people at Daja decided that they're going to do an illegal pilgrimage directly across the Taiwan Strait to Meizhou Island off Fujian, and did that pilgrimage. All the temples have competed in terms of their prestige and power. Yes?
One question. So the pilgrimage is to Dajia, right?
Yes.
But like, where exactly is Matsu coming from? Is she coming from one temple, or is she coming from several large, like different temples all over Taiwan?
So for the many hundreds of temples in Taiwan, for her birthday, each temple organizes a pilgrimage.
So
Yeah, and they go
only
out.
Followed one temple's pilgrimage.
One temple, whenever I went out with Matsu, she always asked to take the bridge. We didn't need to wade across the Shiloshi. We took the bridge. And she will designate our route each time. So we take her route. And then there was an argument with her sister at Beigan. And the people at Beigan, they claim to be a higher level temple than that of Daja. And so I was there, I witnessed this altercation, what happened at the meeting. So I was the Taida representative at the meeting. And so they went back and they said, we're not going back to Beigan. And they negotiated with Shingan. And Shingan is a sister temple to Beigan. And the reason it's called Shingan is because once Beigan was flooded, and the people had to move out from the town and established a new town and brought with them all of the images from their Matsu temple and built a new temple. Then after years passed and Beigan was not flooded anymore, they decided to move back to the old town and back to their temple and rebuilt it. They wanted to bring with them all their Matsu images, everything. And the people by then, the settlers in Shingan, decided that now they have built this temple for Matsu and she's staying there. She's not going to return. So there was a court case. And they went to court. And the judge decided that the Matsu, because she is supposed to be the oldest image of Matsu, is now sitting in Shingan, and yet she should be returned to Beigan, but once a year. So what the people in Shingan have decided, to the letter of the law, to make this action in effect legal, they go in the dead of night and they rush to the border of Beigan and put their foot over and rush back to their temple once a year. And no one can catch them. They plan it secretly. And indeed, they follow the judgment of the law that once a year they will return their image of Matsu to Beigan. So the people in Beigan, they didn't like that and decided that they would simply upgrade themselves in their own way. Among all the other temples, they decided to be the best. And meanwhile, Shingan had been falling into disrepair, an old town that nothing was doing, nothing was happening. And then the people at Daja decided, okay, actually the real Matsu image that's the oldest is in Shingan, and we should take our pilgrimage there. So with all their fanfare and marching down to Beigan, suddenly we make a right turn just before we enter Beigan and divert the whole pilgrimage over to Shingan. And that whole old sleepy town became alive again, rebuilt, reglorified, and all the Daja people gathering around and rebuilt the city. It was amazing to witness that happening. And that's what they do. Because the people at Shingan cleverly decided that their matsu was equal to daja and not higher. But I could see clearly that in Taiwan history there could be all these different wars and conflicts and battles based on land and religion among the Fujian people, the settlers, with their image of Matsu. And of course those coming from Guangdong, the Hakka, they were exempt, they did not follow, they were not involved. And there's so many various miracle places in Taiwan related to Matsu, like bombings and people of salvation, of being saved, and owing that to Matsu.
What about Lukan? Lukan, there is a Matsu temple.
Yeah.
Is that special?
All the markets are related to temples in Taiwan. And for the, if you go to also Buddhist temples in Taiwan, there will be an alcove or a place for Matsu that is usually related to the image or the female divinity of the Buddha, Guan Yin.
Matsu is the one with divination blocks. Do any other temples use divination blocks?
Other Taoist temples in Taiwan are, and of course, the Tao means the way of nature. So you try to connect with the spirit at a Taoist temple, and usually there are mediums to help you. But at most temples, you can find divination blocks and the fortune sticks that will give you the clue to your answer and future fortune. Every temple in Taiwan is specific to a purpose. So you might go to one temple for the cure, another temple to get your children through school, another temple to solve money problems. There are so many different and specific kinds of places to work for your divination.
How do you like temple divination work with the fortune tellers here? They're also
They're nearby.
always.
Okay, so a temple means it is at a sacred space of vibration, and when you're in the temple you can feel something from the spirit of that place, and that's why it's located there. Sometimes it's a stone, sometimes it's really in nature, sometimes it's built up. And temples get renovated, and I was surprised when I went through Taiwan in the 70s and 80s. Temples were being knocked down and rebuilt, and all these what I would consider valuable antiques were being tossed around, and no one cared, it seemed. They just said, no, we're building it new, we don't want that old stuff. And so there's a revitalization process to modernize and to rebuild in a grander way. So the temples become larger, stronger, and more ornate in style. And of course to house more pilgrims. In the Daja pilgrimage, when we start at the stroke of midnight and walk through the fireworks, we suddenly become vegetarian. We cannot resist. And everyone who partakes in the pilgrimage on the route becomes vegetarian. And they're all holding trays of vegetarian dishes for us. It's like a 200-kilometer buffet of all these dishes being held out by devotees. Take my dish, take my beans, take my wonderful dish that I have prepared for you, pilgrim, on the way. If you take my dish, my contribution will be going with you. And you're not supposed to wear any leather, no leather belt, no leather shoes, anything related to animal skin or meat is forbidden. So when you get there, when you get to the destination, and they mentioned in the film, they didn't actually mention what temple they're going to because they didn't want to get into the politics. Yeah, they just said the central temple. I caught that very carefully. Yeah. They didn't say it's going to Beigan or to Shingan, right? Or where they're heading. And it's also very interesting that the people going to Shingan from Daja, these are the pilgrims by foot who actually marched through the paddy fields to get there. And then there was a contingent, because every society is divided, who go by tour bus. And they continue to go to Beigan because they have chartered tours that takes them there in big coaches.
With karaoke?
Yes. Yes. And they go to, they will continue, so they didn't lose all the people from Beigan, they just lost the pilgrimage. Not all the participants. And then people from all other temples are still going to Beigan. So Beigan still has a lot of fanfare and excitement. But the Daja people have revitalized Shingan in a big way. So when I was at the meeting and they were deciding to go to Shingan, I ran out from the meeting and I went to Shingan immediately to see what they're talking about. And the whole place was run down and dusty, and the temple was broken, and I thought, this is the place they're going to use as an alternative to come here? But by the time they got there the following year, the whole thing was dressed up and beautiful and glorified, and it was beautiful, yeah, to partake in that at that moment. So the time when you start to celebrate the birthday, because this is the tour, the traveling session of Matsu, getting her energy back to come home in her temple, and then her birthday party commences. And that's when the tradition of sacrifice and the pork and everything comes back into play. So the pilgrimage is a hiatus, it's a liminal space which the people go into a surreal experience. And I suggest if you're going into it, completely partake into it. Pilgrimage, vegetarian, walking, and it's almost into, and especially with all the smoke and the fireworks, entering an altered state of consciousness in the way. And so don't get distracted. Don't think about, local problems and I have to get back and I have to, do my homework and pass an exam, and don't think about all these things. Just partake in it for the experience, and then you'll come out with something that's completely different in your life. You'll be so refreshed and have gone through like an ordeal. It's like going to Mecca you go to Mecca, what happens to you? You make a pilgrimage, and then you have a life-transforming experience. And of course, Mecca is so big, such a huge pilgrimage, and so many, tens of thousands of people there, all in simple dress, all equal. And it's to give you a sense of commonality of humanity. And then the Mansu pilgrimage is to give you a sense of the commonality of the spirit. And so when I reflect on my personal experiences going time and time again, for the 200-kilometer walk for the 8 days, and all the things, the highs and the lows happening. Some of my students, they collapsed, they had to be rushed to emergency, they got overtaken by the fumes of the fireworks, and I had to rush them to a hospital and get them back on the pilgrimage track, and we're far behind, and we have to catch up. And the birthday of every god or goddess in Taiwan is celebrated with a show. So the god sits there the whole year in its temple, and then at least on the birthday you have opera, you have puppets, you have dance performance, you have all these things. Your temple becomes a stage, and you yourself as the deity is the audience. So actually the stage is facing the deity, it's not facing the public. And then you crowd into a space, so the deity that's out here on the road, when they have their birthday party, they stage everything to the temple, facing the temple. And then it was interesting when it became more popular to show movies to the deity, Hong Kong films, and they would rather than getting this folk opera to perform, they put up a big screen right across the temple. You get this antique 16 or whatever 32 millimeter projector and show the movie. And everyone would sit there and look at the Hong Kong movie, the films, the real films projected, not video or the genuine antique films. And sitting in the antique temple with the antique projector and all these old guys looking there at this film that's supposed to be to entertain the deity. So what has happened is actually with the change in technology, now you cannot get the projectors anymore. All the bulbs, how do you get the bulbs for the projectors, right? They're all burnt out, and you can't get new ones. And how do you get the films on the reels? And you have to keep changing the big reels and having several projectors so that you can work them in sequence and have seamless, from reel to reel. And that had taken over and almost put the opera people out of work. And then the puppets came in. And then the film things broke down. And then video came in. And so many things happening in the technology that now you don't see films anymore. So all the entertainment for the deities has gone through all these changes and transformations in the past 30 years. So there was a lot of TV programming for Taiwan puppetry. Puppet shows on TV, because you would rather see the puppet show at home than going down to the corner fair or the market or wherever the puppets were being performed. You could just see them on TV. So it wasn't lost. It was not a lost art. It was simply transformed into a TV show.